I want to talk. So I'm going to talk about Area 51, and it's an old book, and Annie's got multiple books. But I want to, because the bigger thing that I want to speak about, this is the book the only book I have to reference. Annie's an incredible writer, and I will be reading more. She brought me 2 more books, and just your analysis of these things is just incredible. I mean, you were just talking about the amount of. I was just reading the epilogue to Area 51 again, and there was one guy that you had lunch with for a year and a half, and just trying and with kindness to get him to open up a little more. You never reveal his name, but a year and a half, and you got some only very little out of him, but important very little. Yeah. That gave an overview, and that's why it was your epilogue. But talk about the amount of time and research and effort that goes into these books, and that you're doing, and you're on your 5th one now.
But okay, so I love that you love that story in the end and sitting with someone in a diner, right?
Yeah.
For, time and time and time again. But I mean, that speaks to the bigger issue of like, I would sit with him, and his story is so powerful, and what he went through, and he was at the crossroads of all the mythology around aliens and Roswell, and he also was part of the Manhattan Project. So he had this past that was extraordinary, and here he was with me, just about to turn 90, sitting in a diner, and the waitress would come up.
You see these old people, you go, everyone has a story.
Well,
look at that one.
You and I think that, but like we would sit in these diners out in Las Vegas, and like the lady would come up, the waitress, and she's busy, and she's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, starts talking to her, right? And I could just tell in that moment she didn't have time for it, and like, who's this old man, And I just thought to myself, if you had any idea who this is, what they've done.
Literally had her family's lives in his hands.
And that kind of stuff is like, why wouldn't you sit with that person?
I want to just, I feel like I'm going against what I told you, but I need to educate you a little bit just about the power of the information in Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base. It's taken from the declassified documents after 50 years, is it? They declassified roughly. And interviews with how many different people who worked in Area 51 and around?
That book was 80-something guys who lived and worked at Area 51.
Okay.
I mean, that was like a real stunner for me to be able to get that.
So, I'm just to give you the weight of this book. The answers to Roswell are here in the book. They're in the government documents. And the Roswell flying saucers were Russian. Okay? It's in the government documents. That's why the cover-up, because it was the beginning of the Cold War, and the United States government did not want to admit that the Russians had gotten 2 flying vehicles undetectable from Alaska to Arizona, deliberately to Arizona, by the way, because that's where
New Mexico.
New Mexico. And Roswell, New Mexico, thank you. And they crashed. There are Russian markings inside. This was the cover-up because the government, the people would have freaked out that the Ruskies, the commies, the Reds had somehow gotten that far into our country undetected. This was Stalin's humiliation scheme against the United States, okay? And there were people inside there. They were children whose bodies had been physically altered by, who was the German scientist?
Well, originally it was Mengele. Mengele.
Their skulls had been changed. Their eye sockets had been changed. It was remote. They were remotely flown in. Yes, we've had remote vehicles since Tesla invented the remote control in, I think, 1897 for the World's Fair. Yes. Okay, so we've had remote capabilities for a century or more now, okay? And this is where the cover-up started. The whole thing was done to humiliate the United States, embarrass the United States, and the government started the cover-up, and they preferred the UFO thing,
Yeah.
people thinking it's a UFO rather than the truth of the matter that it was the Russians, because that would have really freaked people out. So you're hearing me say this. If you're not saying, I've got to get this book, this is why I mean, and there's so much more about dirty bombs and
The
nuclear
U-2,
mistakes,
the
the
U-2
U-2.
and the SR-71 and how it led to all of this incredible American
I
technology.
mean, there's what's going on. Area 51 is not what you think's going on, but what's going on there was going on, and that's one of the things is this is essentially documents that open up in the 50s, Area 51, documents released 50 years later. It's been 50 more years since these documents here. And when you see was going on then, you go, what are they working on now? Okay, what are they working on now? Okay.
Now I have to interrupt and say,
please.
You tell that story incredibly well, and I'm going to bring you along on the next radio show because you do it better than I do.
Please. Okay, and I will do my homework.
Well, it just sounds very clinical when I talk about it, and you make it sound very narrative and thrilling.
Well, this is, I said to you when I spoke to you on the phone, we had a very short talk, but I said, this book, the information that is in this book, it's like, I felt like things needed to be just written on one page, like just put a statement on a page and then just nothing else. And just say, all right, just take that in for a while because then you're just reading on to the next thing and your brain is just being fried. It's being fried. Okay. So, just so people understand, you work with declassified documents on all your books?
All my books, always. I mean, the guys at the National Archives and I have like a great working relationship. Oh, here comes Annie with another Freedom of Information Act request.
Okay, so
you know.
I would say, could you explain in general, because all of her books are these declassified documents, how do you get these books? I'll just tell you a quick little side story. I had my best friend's, when I was a kid's father one day just came walking out of the house and said, I was in the OSS. And he just, and we were high school kids. What's that? He goes, it was a secret government organization during World War II. I was recruited, and he just started spilling his guts. And apparently, he couldn't say anything, and suddenly the time was up, and he was allowed to say something, and he just sat down and just spilled his guts about all the top secret things. And this is my friend's dorky dad, who I couldn't imagine my wildest dreams was killing people.
He probably jumped out of aircraft in Norway and France. And the OSS stands for the Office of Strategic Services. And it's the precursor organization of the CIA.
Yes.
And that is in my new book because that is the precursor to the paramilitary element of the CIA. Those were the badass, pardon my French, operators.